I'm Dennis Reynolds, Littleton's mayor. Welcome to the Littleton Show. As you can tell tonight, we're not in our normal studios where we do the show from, but we're standing here at Centennial Elementary Grade School. We're going to relive an event in Littleton's history tonight that, for those of you who haven't been around too long, is certainly going to be interesting. We're going to talk about the flood of 1965. 30 years ago in June, a wall of water came down the South Platte River and wreaking all kinds of havoc and destruction. $328 million in damages from that flood, and that was in 1965 dollars. Today, that'd be a multi-billion-dollar flood. Somebody gave me a perspective on this today when I was downtown. You might recall in mid-May, there was a flood in downtown Denver. The South Platte went out of its banks down by Elitch's. They said the flow of that river was about 8,000 to 10,000 cubic feet per second in that little flood. 30 years ago, just south of Littleton, it was measured at 165,000 cubic feet per second coming down the river. It was a tremendous amount of water. But tonight, through film, photos, some interviews, we're going to talk about that flood. We're going to talk about what happened before, what happened during, and we're going to talk about the community's response to that flood.
When nature shows her dramatic and powerful side, we stand humbled, terrified, and transfixed. Tornadoes, earthquakes, volcanoes, they stir our souls and destroy our works. Usually these events are framed as disasters from which man tries to heal wounds and rebuild. This is the story of one of these events.
It was an awesome night.
I didn't believe it.
Well, it wasn't on time like they kept telling us.
Very powerful.
The first thought I had when I saw the flood was, this is not like floods that they had in Kansas.
But the big storm clouds were forming to the south. And later in the afternoon, the sheriff asked me to go down to Parker to find out whether or not there were people trapped on cars in the flooding river down there, Cherry Creek. So I went down, terrible rain. Nothing to find, so I went on south to Franktown, and from there, it was raining so hard I had to stop several times because I couldn't see the front of my car. I got to Franktown and went west up over the hill to Castle Rock, and when I got into Castle Rock, it was quite a startling experience because looking down at the Plum Creek there, I could see that the Plum Creek was raging and was high.
Stan Bush knew that East Plum Creek is a tributary of the South Platte River, which flows north through Denver.
The bridge at the north end of town was underwater. So I got out on the interstate and tried to make radio contact with Littleton, no luck. And I had to make the call several times to convince them that, yes, we were going to have a flood.
Morning of the flood, I came off duty at about 6 in the morning from being the graveyard dispatcher. Long about 11 o'clock or noon, I received a phone call at home waking me up from my night sleep during the day to come into the office to assist with dispatching that the county had been hit by a number of tornadoes and a lot of heavy rain. And as the day went on, more and more rain was coming in. We started getting reports of possible flooding from Cheeseman Reservoir and from down near Castle Rock on Plum Creek.
But when they started saying it's raining, and it's been raining, and it's raining very, very hard up toward Larkspur, we didn't think much of it at that time until reports started coming in on the radio from Larkspur and Castle Rock. And then when it got to Sedalia, we figured, well, something must be going on.
Well, I'd been working down at one of the radio stations, and on my way home I heard some of the other radio stations broadcasting that there was going to be a cloudburst, and they're talking about way about east and some of those farms there, and I thought, well, we don't have to worry about a thing here.
But I do remember going down to look at the river, see how high it was, and
hoping that things would break up and having no idea that Plum Creek would be the ultimate culprit in the flood. But other than that, just kind of watching the river. And then later in the day, I heard that there was to be a wall of water. It was coming down, so I rushed out to what we call Jackass Hill, and along with a lot of other people, and we waited, and sure enough, here came this wall of water, which I think I've exaggerated the height of over the years, but it was a very significant amount of water and very powerful.
They said, well, there's this flood that's moving about 60 miles an hour. It's coming down the river, and it's coming from Castle Rock. And with a little calculation, we said, well, that's about, gosh, an hour. So the city began evacuating areas that they thought were flood prone. And the police and the fire department went down and had a lot of trouble in some cases getting people to leave. And the area was pretty well evacuated by about 6:30, 7 o'clock. And then we all kind of stood around and twiddled our thumbs and waited for about 2 hours until the flood actually got here.
Few people understood the magnitude of what was happening on Plum Creek watershed that day. 14 inches of rain fell in only 3 hours.
And when the thing hit Sedalia, that's when it really got big, because the water coming down West Plum Creek hit the water coming down East Plum Creek, and right down there south of Sedalia, where the two come together, that creek was 1.1 miles wide. And that's when the Grange Hall, the Presbyterian Church, and several old private residents in Sedalia were washed out.
Now the water spilled into the Platte.
We started picking up a lot more power supply in the area. So we started losing some of the power poles, and as these transformers and things would go out, then we'd see the fireworks. And then got everybody moved back, and it did hit, did start shooting trailers out of the trailer park there over Bowles Avenue. All the debris it had picked up piled up very quickly behind the bridge, and the river started going around the bridge itself and flooding into Happy Homes and a number of the business areas. Eventually, some of the businesses were knocked off their foundations, and we had fires. Tortilla Flats was a restaurant, brick construction down near the river. It was washed off its foundations, and its public service gas supply then made torches into the sky, and that's what lit up that area around the Bowles Bridge of the Platte River, and it was the Tortilla Flats gas supply torching into the air.
When I was watching it there in Littleton, I was up in the cemetery, and the interesting thing was those big houses down in Columbine, that head of water would hit them. It was about 4 or 5 feet high, that head of water. Well, there was a lot of water in that amount. Those big homes would just float up and then go with the current. There were two things. They'd either stay in the main current and try to get under Bowles River, the bridge there over the river, or they'd go around it. Well, if they stayed in the main current, they were knocked to pieces because of the bridge.
So we got in the car, went back, and started checking our neighbors, because some of them lived closer to the river than we do. And sure enough, they were cutting fences and letting their animals loose so they could go to the high ground. And everybody participated in that. And the Tucks, who had the horse breeding outfit, the racehorses down there, that was kind of special, because they had 2 very expensive stallions. And so they turned all the rest of them loose, but we didn't dare turn those several $100,000 stallions loose and let them get cut up too much or broken leg or something.
We were very fortunate. The only people that were really trapped in the area were at the Centennial Racetrack. And the racetrack was strong enough, and of course great big concrete blocks and all, that the people that were there went up in the upper parts of the racetrack and were able to stay dry. We thought about putting boats out to get to them and decided there was too much debris. I mean, we had homes floating down the river. One home from Columbine just came through almost intact until it hit the Crestline Bridge, and then it went splat. And lots of mobile homes, that came floating down. It was an awesome sight.
I don't know if other people remember this, but one of the most unusual things was the smell. As it was kind of rolling down, it looked like you see water going down a gulch, you know, when you turn the hose on and or going down the curb. But it was roiling and creating kind of a dust cloud in front of it. And I suppose because of where it had come and the nature of that dust, it generated a very foul odor. I mean, it smelled like a cross between barnyards and sewage treatment plants.
The flood pushed through Littleton, leaving in its wake shocking devastation.
It was not like a flood where the river rose and deposited the mud and then went away. It was like a tornado.
The next morning when we were able to make sure that things were stable, I went out and got in my car. I'd been at the station all night and drove down to the river, and it was a tremendous shock because there had been a mobile home park on the south side of Bowles Avenue on the west side of Santa Fe. Those trailers were gone. It was nothing but just an open field. And as you drove further north, I realized that all those trailers were piled up against the Crestline Bridge. And looking at the debris and the rubble and the damage that was done, I drove further north to Bellevue. You still couldn't get across Bellevue, but I walked as far as I could and then looked, across to the west. And here was a tree with about a 5-foot diameter trunk rammed right through a service station.
The scene when I went out in a patrol car to tour the area to get my first look at it, the National Guard was already in place. They were manning most of the roadblocks in the Littleton area. The damaged area where the flood had hit looked like a war zone, and the tremendous amount of damage to the trailer parks, the businesses, to the racetrack. And then the effect of having the troops on hand made it look like a war zone.
What the land looked like after the flood passed through, a good many of the trees were gone. Any buildings in the path of that were gone, or they were damaged to the point where they were not usable. They had to be destroyed. There were mud flats. I would imagine this area right through here had a lot of mud deposited in it. And homes that were still left had mud, like floods do leave mud, because floods do carry fine silt. And when the water stops motion, when there's no gradient, that stuff settles. So you'll have a mess in your house, if you got a house.
The rebuilding took years, but during the construction of Chatfield Reservoir, a controversy arose concerning what to do with the river downstream from the dam.
The first logical question is, if you're building this huge dam, why do you need to dig a ditch downstream? It doesn't seem to make sense. Why not leave it open, and when it floods open land? In the meantime, the city can have parks that they can use. So 99.9% of the time it's a park. If you ever need to flood it, you can flood it. In fairness, I think there was also an attitude that said, we think this whole project is so over-designed that if the water ever goes over that spillway, it'll be a very, very, very unusual circumstance. So the odds of it ever flooding are really pretty slim. Don't tell the Corps of Engineers we told you that, but that was at least the attitude that some of the people in Littleton had.
I got excited.
Vaughn Gardenier was on the city council at that time, and he remembers.
Well, luckily, when we talk about the damage, there were very few structures in the area from what is now C-470 down to about Tortilla Flat. And because of that, it just seemed natural to suggest that we not channelize or rip-rap the valley, but perhaps turn it into a floodplain park. And that was Larry's concept. He presented it to council.
But the process was not so simple. Buying up the floodplain would cost money, lots of it.
It seemed to us to make sense, and we couldn't quite imagine why no one had ever thought of it before, is that various agencies were committed to spending a lot of money to dig the channel. The Colorado Water Conservation Board had an appropriation to buy the right-of-way, for example, from private landowners. The Corps of Engineers then had money to contract with earth-moving contractors to actually dig the channel. And one of our ideas was to say, why don't you take that money and just buy all the land that's going to flood? You know, you might come out even, and you can have a park instead of having the channel. But the unusual idea was not only to leave the river alone and buy everything that's subject to flooding. The idea was, let's use the money that you're going to use to dig the ditch to go buy the land. And that was pretty radical. The Corps of Engineers said, we can't change the project without an act of Congress. Congress authorized it, Congress would have to change it. And that was supposed to drive a silver stake through our heart. And we said, well, that's what Congress is for. I mean, let's go change it if we need to.
But change would require the understanding and support of Littleton voters.
So when they were presented with this idea as here's a way to save a natural area, a fairly large natural area, 600 and some acres, and it's going to be paid for mostly by other people, and there'll be a small bond issue, they were very enthusiastic for it.
We held an election in the fall of '71, and we combined a bond issue for the park with a bond issue for Kettering Park, also in Littleton. And we all campaigned for its passage, and in the fall it passed by a 2-to-1 majority. So we were on our way.
But this was to be the first of many obstacles. Now Littleton had to take their case to Washington.
Several of us went back to Washington, D.C. to present our plan to our congressional delegation, and felt that we had a warm reception. And we also felt that we were getting some positive reaction from the Corps of Engineers. But as time went on, we realized that there was a lot of delay in action, and we weren't real sure how much in favor they were of our floodplain plan.
Congress took until 1974 to sign the new Water Resources Act, which finally allowed the city to use money from the Corps of Engineers to purchase land along the river.
It's a place where kids can go and play with snakes and frogs and you know, splash in the water and do things that people have done for years, you know, in open space areas. You don't have to do anything else to it. I mean, don't put soccer fields on it, don't put in ball diamonds, just leave it alone and let nature do whatever nature's going to do. And I think that end has been pretty well achieved.
And the position of the Corps of Engineers?
The interesting thing, back to the idea that in 1970 we didn't have the EPA, an environmental impact statement was done at the time the park was built. One of the first, actually, environmental impact statements. That was a new idea. When the city decided they wanted to extend the road across, the Corps of Engineers had so changed its attitude toward the park that the Corps of Engineers made the city prove that they weren't going to damage the flood control and the wildlife. So that having been the opponent in 1970, by the time the road was built in the mid-'80s, it was the Corps of Engineers that was the defender. So I always thought that was kind of interesting.
Well, it just seemed to me that it would be a tremendous asset to this whole urban area. It was difficult to visualize that Littleton and the whole Denver area was going to grow very rapidly over the years. And here was a chance to have 500 plus acres right in the middle of a large urban area that could be just a wonderful setting for the community, the whole community. I've always thought the whole South Denver, Littleton, Englewood area would enjoy this park, and I think that's come to pass.
As I look around this park, I am thrilled. I've lived across the river for since 1950, about when it was 51, someplace in there, when we first moved out here. And there was nothing like we have here now. Houses every place and buildings every place. And so this kind of takes me back to the beginning. We've saved this whole side over here for the future and for the people who live here. This is their park. It's your park and my park.
So Littleton found a way to leave a positive, lasting legacy from one of nature's powerful and dramatic displays.
In some strange way, I guess the city is better off. If we hadn't had the flood, we wouldn't have a park.
When I got back to Littleton, why, we had a rather unusual situation facing us because the city manager and the city council had gone to Estes Park for a retreat. The police chief was over hunting on the western slope, and the fire chief and the assistant fire chief were both at a conference in Cortez. Well, taking a look at that, it suddenly dawned on me that I was in charge of the city as far as that was concerned.
Well, the only thing I wanted to mention was when you talk with people, a lot of their memories are long gone. They don't remember much about it. Only those that were right close to it. I know of one case, a woman lived down there up Jar Canyon. That's up west of Sedalia. She had 2 kids. She took those kids to their music lesson. I think it was a piano lesson up toward Perry Park. It wasn't clear at Perry Park, but it was up toward there. When that rain started, well, it had rained before, and she figured, well, it's not going to hurt anything, let it rain. But the longer the day or the more of the day went by at that time, the harder the rain got. Well, when she got her boy from his music lesson and started home, she couldn't get home. The road was washed out, and that was on West Plum Creek. So she had to get up on high ground as soon as possible. So she took off for Larkspur, thinking maybe I can get home that way. Road was gone there too. So she had to stay with some people. She didn't even know them, but she got herself and she had 2 kids, a boy and a girl, and she got into those people's house and stayed there for another day until they could get the roads put together so she could get out. She lives up there in Castle Rock now.
And one in particular, friends of ours, they heard the flood was coming, and so they got their neighbors over and went to work taking all of their nice furniture. They collected nice furniture up in the 2nd story. And then coming back down, they mixed up some martinis and went over on the hill to watch the flood go by and see if it surrounded their house, you know. Well, first thing you know, before they got settled on the hill there, here comes a big wall of water, and of course it took the house and everything right off the foundation, took it on down the hill. And it's kind of sad. But now they haven't built that close since that time. They built up on a little knoll.
I was here in 1965. I lived on the other side of the river, and the floodwaters were over here, of course, coming right up to the corner of this school. But I had bought our first house 30 years ago, just a block on the west side of Centennial Grade School. When we found out it was dry and everything, that was fine. But we were on the other side of the river and had a hard time moving. There was only one bridge open in all of the South Metro area, and that was a very tentative bridge at best anyway. It was weakened by the flood. I had to go to the city of Littleton, get special permits so that I could get moving trucks across that bridge so we could move into our new home. Again, I'm Littleton's Mayor Dennis Reynolds. Thanks for being with us this evening, and good night.